This conference will now be recorded.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight at the Public Information Meeting number 2 for the Local Concept Development Study of the Oradell Avenue Bridge over the Hackensack River in the borough of Oradell in Bergen County. My name is Nicole Pace-Addeo, and I've been serving as the Public Outreach Manager for this study, along with our Dewberry team. So at this point, I'm going to turn over our meeting to our presenter, Rick Menino, who will take you through our meeting, and then we will have Q&A at the end. Please don't hesitate to type in your questions into the chat box as they come up, and again, we will address them in the order in which they were received during Q&A. But without further ado, I present to you Rick Menino.
Thanks, Nicole. I appreciate everybody's time tonight. This is the second of public meetings for this project. We had our first one just about a year ago. So tonight's meeting is really to bring you up to speed on what we have done, the coordination that we have gone through with the partners working on the project with us, being Bergen County, North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority, the Borough of Oradell, yourselves as public participants, stakeholders, utility owners that we've spoken to, a number of people. And I'm here on behalf of Dewberry, representing that entire team who was engaged by Bergen County to study this particular crossing and determine, kind of a recommended course of action to address the conditions of the structure. So with that, there's a lot of alternatives that we looked at. We're going to focus on those tonight, but at the same time, we do have a lot of slides. I'll try and get through them and point out the primary differences between some of the alternatives, so that the intent is to get feedback from you as the public and answer any questions you may have on the project. So I will try and go through things quick. We can always go back through the slide presentation if there are areas that you'd like to revisit. So with that said, let me get rolling here. As I mentioned, today's agenda is really to bring everybody back up to speed, if you will, since last time we met as a general public meeting, which was about a year ago. We have done a lot of work since then. We've gathered a lot of data. We've spoken to a lot of folks. We've interacted with several. And we're here tonight to talk about the different alternatives that we identified to address the physical condition of the structure. And go through those with you and obtain feedback on the alternative, and so that we can walk away with a support of a recommended or preliminary preferred alternative, or PPA as it's called, and then give you the information on what the next steps for the life of this project would entail. So I'll touch base real quickly on a little bit of the history. Obviously, we're here tonight to talk about Oradell Avenue Bridge, which carries Oradell Avenue, obviously over the Hackensack River, located in the heart of Oradell. As you can tell from this aerial map, it's a major thoroughfare, separates what I'll call, or links, actually not separates, links a heavy residential area to the east of the river with downtown Oradell, and a lot of public services and such. The train is immediately adjacent to the bridge, etc. So it's a vital link within the region. To zoom in on the site itself, you can see how close the bridge is to New Jersey Transit's tracks and the Oradell station in downtown Oradell. It's surrounded by park property, environmentally sensitive property.
Rich, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Rich, we are only seeing your face, not the maps.
Not the maps? That's not good.
Yep.
Hold on one second.
Yep. No problem.
Rich, I'm seeing the map. I'm seeing
Yeah,
it.
we're
Okay.
all seeing the map. It must be just you, Bashar. All right, everyone's seeing the
Okay.
map except him. So let's continue on. Go ahead, Rick.
Fortunately, Bashar, you know a lot of this anyway, so this will be just a brief revisited history, if you will. But
No problem. If it's only me, that's fine.
okay. So just to give everybody a little bit of a quick synopsis, in addition to carrying vehicular traffic, both eastbound and westbound, the bridge itself serves to carry public and private utilities as well. So as we're studying how do we restore the structural capacity of this bridge and maintain traffic and minimize impacts to the environment, one of the things we also have to do is make sure that we accommodate the public utilities. So that, will be touched upon in the presentation as I go through as well. Quick history on the bridge, built in 1904. So it has certainly outlived or lived its life. Over 100 and plus 115, 118 years in existence. A substructure, all the masonry work that's there is from 1904. The bridge has undergone repairs over the years, but it is just time based on the inspections that are done on a biennial inspection, on a biennial every 2-year cycle. It's been identified as there's issues with the structure, there's concerns with its integrity, and the county and NJTPA recognizes that these projects do take time to get from concept through to final design and be in position to take advantage of funding. And that's why we've studied the project that's starting now so that it can get a preliminary preferred alternative and then advance to the next phase of its life and into the design phase. Couple critical items that we'll talk about. One is the actual condition or the physical framing of the structure. It's what's called a two-girder system. As you can imagine, gets its name from the two primary girders, one on either side of the structure. In this photo here, you can see actually the top of the girder extends above the top of the roadway surface on both sides. And it's considered a two-girder system because it's that, two girders. And these main girders carry essentially all the loads that are imposed on this bridge. And therefore, it's considered a non-redundant structure. In other words, if their deterioration gets significantly impacts one such girder that it cannot assist in supporting the load, then the structural system does not perform properly and you could have failure of the system. Okay. So in today's day and age, as engineers, we look to introduce redundancy into our structural systems. So that's one key point to keep in mind as we go forward. The other one that, some of the additional information we had gathered was we did go out and actually get some traffic counts on the bridge. We waited as long as we thought we could to try and let the pandemic situation kind of dissipate until we could try and get some reasonable counts. So we thought we were getting reasonable counts at the time. But in essence, what we were looking for, and you'll see here ADT is average daily traffic. What we were trying to find out is, with these counts, is there really a dominant movement? In other words, is the majority of the bridge being used to go from east to west, or is it from west to east? What we found was that that's not really the case. It's used heavily, as you would imagine, in one direction in the morning, and then it reverses in the evening. But it is used continuously throughout the day significantly, as well as on weekends. And we were looking for that information to see if that would guide us to look at different alternatives as to, does it make sense for us to possibly maintain only a single lane of traffic across the bridge while we're looking to rehabilitate it? Those types of things. And what came out of that was that we did not find that to be advantageous. So in all of the alternatives that I'll talk to you about, the intent is to maintain both lanes of traffic in operation throughout construction. And when we initially met, we talked about establishing a purpose and need. This is a critical document because it basically defines what is the reason for this project, number one. What are we trying to do by studying this structure? And in addition to what is its purpose, in other words, it's pretty straightforward in this case, based on the bridge inspections, based on the fact that the bridge has been identified through those inspections as structurally deficient. The purpose is very straightforward. The goal is to ensure that this crossing would continue to perform well into the future. And at the same time, one of the other goals was, as everyone knows who uses this bridge, that the roadway actually necks down. The bridge provides a narrower roadway with usable roadway surface than the approach to either side. So the goal was also to try and carry that roadway cross section through the structure. And in addition to that, in addition to the purpose and need, we also, in talking to the public and in talking to the local officials, the emergency services systems and things, we're trying to define what are other critical goals that are desired. And the two that we took away, as you can see them listed here, the first two were probably the most important two that we heard of. Clearly, the goal was to maintain vehicular, pedestrian, and bicycle traffic, maintain traffic across this structure throughout construction, if at all possible, for the entire duration of structure. No one wanted to sever this link, if at all possible, to do the work to rehabilitate the structure and still maintain traffic. Okay, this was critical from an emergency services standpoint because emergency services is on the west side of the river. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a significant residential community on the east side. Also, one of the things that we had learned is that the structure provides a crossing of the Hackensack River, that the crossing immediately to the south often floods during storms, and this emergency services are still allowed to get across this particular bridge. So it's a vital link in that regard as well. The other goals are pretty obvious. We want to make sure we minimize any impacts to New Jersey Transit tracks that are right there. And obviously minimize impacts to the the surrounding environment. We are surrounded by park property. We are surrounded by historic sites. So the intent was to minimize those impacts while we're trying to get this bridge restored. So once we had gathered our data, as I mentioned, we recognized that one of the goals was to provide that same cross section of roadway along this bridge or across this bridge and eliminate the necking down of the roadway. So the desired bridge section that was developed was laid out to do just that. In other words, on the approaches, you have about a 40-foot curb to curb width. So that's what this desired section shows. Two 8-foot lanes, two 12-foot lanes, two 8-foot shoulders. And the goal again was to maintain sidewalks on either side of the structures, similar to what exists today. So that was our premise for the bridge cross section. After that, we sat back and thought about, okay, how do we replace this bridge? And in essence came up with, in addition to a no build or a do nothing alternative, which we always put out there but does not address the purpose and need. We also looked at 7 other options. The difference being alternative 2, and I'll walk through these and kind of show you the advantages and disadvantages of each. And for certain ones, I'll show you the staging scheme. But alternative 2 is the only one that in which we tried to reuse a portion of the existing structure, or could we rehabilitate this bridge and accommodate a portion of it or use a portion of it to achieve that desired bridge section and salvage some of the structure, if you would. All of the other alternatives that we looked at investigated a brand new structure, and the nuance between them is simply how would we try and maintain traffic while we constructed the bridge. So a lot of these are subtle differences. As I get into them, I'll explain those subtle differences, but that's really the dividing line, if you will, between these alternatives. How do we try and achieve that goal of maintaining traffic and minimizing impacts to the users, and achieve a balance of those goals as best as possible. So with that, I'm going to jump right into these so that I get to your questions and hopefully answer any questions you may have. So the first one that we looked at was, can we rehabilitate this bridge, or can we use any components from the existing bridge and in essence mimic that existing structure type? Well, as I mentioned, the 2 main elements of the existing bridge that are the primary structural members are the 2 main girders. Okay. Now, for us to carry the wider roadway system that's desired, in other words, eliminate the necking down from the 40-foot desired down to what's currently shown about 30 feet across the structure, we obviously would have to extend the distance between these two primary members. In order to do that, as it's shown below, we literally would have to remove the existing deck, dismantle the structure, send these two girders out to be modified, strengthened, cleaned, repainted, supplemented with additional members, because by us widening this structure to accommodate a wider roadway, now we've introduced heavier loads onto those girders. And in addition to just the pure size difference of the structure, today's design loads are greater than when this structure was originally designed. Okay, obviously we've got heavier trucks, more vehicles using the bridge today. So the design criteria forces us to modify basically the entire structure. So with that said, let me try and see if I could just walk you through the staging of this. In order to do this, for us to dismantle this bridge, to salvage those two main girders, the only way to do that, again, because we do have a two girder system, to do it efficiently would be to provide a temporary bridge on either side of the structure today. Then we would divert traffic to those temporary structures, which would then give the contractor entire access to the existing bridge shown here in brown. Allows us to disassemble the structure, send those two primary girders out to be repaired, to be strengthened, to be modified, repainted, restored as part of the overall system of the new bridge, all brought back. And while that is being done, the contractor would build new foundations for the new structure, for the rehabilitated superstructure, which would then be placed on. All of that would be accomplished while traffic is maintained on two temporary bridges. I did kind of just, I mentioned earlier that utilities are critical. All of the alternatives that we've looked at, our intent is to first eliminate, as I'll call it, that constraint imposed by the utilities. So you'll see here on this first slide that what we've done is we've taken the existing utilities that are both aerial lines that are on the north side and or the main underground utility that's carried on this structure, which is a sanitary main. And we brought the sanitary main below grade, below the stream, and outside of the footprint of work so that this could be accomplished, so that the work on the bridge could be accomplished while this utility was already relocated as a first order of business. So all of these alternatives we looked at, the first thing we would do with any of them is to relocate the utilities, get the footprint of the site cleared for the contractor so that his primary focus then becomes how do we maintain traffic and either disassemble the structure or construct a new one in stages. So just to step back again, we would divert traffic to the two temporary bridges. That allows us to rehabilitate the existing members that we can salvage from the original bridge, bring them back, reassemble them on site with new framing, supported on a new substructure, and then in essence restore the crossing with the framing mimicking, if you will, the existing system. Okay, that is the long and the short of a rehab option. The advantages of that are pretty straightforward, and you'll see that when we're talking about the advantages for all these alternatives, a common theme is going to be it restores the structural capacity of the bridge and accommodates the desired roadway width. If the alternative did not achieve those, we probably wouldn't even have looked at it. So a lot of these will be repetitious. I'll try and point out the little, like I said, the slight differences between some of these. And clearly the primary advantage of this alternative is that we certainly maintain vehicular and pedestrian traffic. And the other appearance, we're mimicking the appearance of the existing structure, which none of the other alternatives do. Okay, so that's the primary advantage of this. The use of the two temporary structures separates the contractor's work from the traffic zone, which improves his safety and the safety of others who are traveling through the construction zone. But the disadvantages of this are obvious. We've got two temporary bridges, one either side. So therefore that significantly impacts the adjacent property, the adjacent park property on either side, okay? And all of this comes at a significant construction cost, okay? Nearly $13 million. So as we moved on into our various alternatives, we tried to eliminate some of these disadvantages of the earlier alternative, you would. So we proceed through logically, okay? With alternative 3, we're basically saying, is there a way that we could avoid two temporary structures so that we limit some of that environmental impact associated with providing a temporary structure on the south and on the north, okay? So under this scenario, alternative 3, we said, okay, let's try and reuse a portion of this existing bridge to maintain traffic while we put one lane of traffic on a temporary bridge on the south side. Now, as I mentioned before, this existing bridge, its structural framing consists of two main girders. So for us to reuse this portion of this existing structure to maintain traffic, we have to maintain that structural system. So under this scenario, while we bypass traffic on one side, on the southbound crossing of a temporary bridge, in order for us to remove a portion of the existing structure while we keep traffic on that structure, we have to install what's called a strong back girder. And this girder, in essence, replaces the existing through girder on the north side. We pick up the loads to this temporary girder, which then allows us to dismantle the north side while we keep one lane of traffic open on the existing. Then we simply kind of work our way across the bridge, if you would, while we maintain traffic on the westbound traffic on part of the bridge. We then can reconstruct the new portion of the proposed structure. Once that's built, then we can still keep eastbound traffic on the temporary bridge, transfer traffic to the newly constructed portion of the new structure on the north side, and that allows us to then dismantle the rest of the existing structure and rebuild the remainder of the new structure. So that when it's all said and done, we remove the temporary structure, restore traffic onto the new bridge, brand new bridge. Okay, this structure allows us to meet that desired roadway cross section and minimizes impacts to the north side because we were able to reuse a portion of the existing structure to maintain traffic. Okay, in order to do that, I just wanted to walk you through to show you the sections really quickly on this one. We start with our existing bridge. As I mentioned, we would then build a temporary bridge on the south side. This allows us to transfer traffic to this temporary structure. We would then install the strong back girder, as I mentioned. This strong back girder allows us to pick up the loads from this remaining portion of the bridge onto this girder, and then we can literally cut these floor beams and remove the north half of the bridge, or northern portion of the bridge. With this out of the way, we can build a portion of the new structure. Once that's built, we can transfer traffic to it. So westbound traffic would be on the north section of the new structure. Allows us to dismantle the remainder of the original bridge, reconstruct the balance of the new bridge. And as you see, when it's all said and done, our new bridge remains within the right-of-way. The temporary structure goes away, and we can restore traffic. So again, as you'll see, the advantage of this, yep, we restored structural capacity. We've got that desired width we want. We maintain traffic. The difference to this one, the advantage to this one is by using that temporary strong back girder, it lets us eliminate the impacts on that north side of Oradell Avenue. Minimizes the footprint of the bridge because we stay within the existing roadway. We avoid that temporary impact on the north. And as a result, we're able to lower our costs. Okay. The disadvantages to this is that now we've got an increased number of stages. Okay, we're maintaining traffic on the existing bridge, and therefore we've added stage. We've got a middle work zone where the contractor is working in a tight zone with traffic immediately next to them. Those are the disadvantages. Okay. So again, we slide on to that next option. All right, is there a way for us to eliminate the temporary bridge on the south side? Right, we started out with 2 temporary bridges. We said, let's eliminate one on the north. All right, can we get away with, as I'll call it, eliminate, building a temporary bridge on the south side? Well, this solution, alternative 4, says, well, rather than put a temporary bridge out here, in the first stage, let's build a little bit more bridge than we actually need, but then we'll transfer traffic to that portion while we use that in combination with the strong back girder. So to just walk you through this one, again, we would dismantle a portion of the existing bridge. We take the sidewalk off on the south side. We still maintain traffic, pedestrian traffic on the north side. We would then build a portion of the new bridge so that we could transfer traffic to it, so that we could transfer the eastbound traffic to it. Once we've transferred eastbound traffic to it, we install the strong back girder that we talked about under alternative 3. That allows us to dismantle the northern portion of the existing bridge while we maintain 1 lane of traffic on the remnant of the original structure. Again, then we build that piece that we demolished while traffic maintains its flows on the existing and the new. When it's all said and done, we shift traffic, we split traffic, putting that westbound traffic on the new piece, removing that last little piece of the original bridge, constructing it, and that allows us to then open the structure. Now, what we end up with on this one is, in essence, we're trading temporary bridge, what we had used to maintain eastbound traffic during construction, with a wider structure that we're using this bridge that we built in the initial stage to maintain traffic. We end up with a significantly wider sidewalk than necessary. Okay, so to just go quickly through those stages again, so you can see where this is a combination of alternative 3, in that we are using the strong back girder in one stage, but rather than have a temporary bridge on the south side, we've removed a portion of the existing bridge and built a portion of new structure here instead. Unlike the temporary bridge, this alternative requires that we build a temporary sidewalk support system in this stage, so that when we get to the subsequent stage where we need to remove this northern half of the structure, we have a sidewalk area. Okay, so that is one of the disadvantages of this alternative, which I'll highlight in a sec. This just walks us through the rest of the construction where we've overbuilt to the south. As I said, strong back girder, we build the remnant. The remaining section gives us our overall construction. Okay. The difference between this one and the early one and alternative 3, we don't need any temporary bridges. Okay, that eliminates the use of any temporary bridge. And I said we trade that off with impacts to the south side of Oradell Avenue, impacts to the park. So that's the primary advantage of this. No temporary bridges. The advantage is it also gives us a wider sidewalk on that south side. But the disadvantages associated with this are this permanent diversion of park property. Okay, and in essence, we've built the bridge wider, 9 feet wider than we would really need for that desired cross section. Okay, so while it saves us money in temporary bridge, we've overbuilt, so its cost is fairly close to alternative 3. Alternative 5, I'll go through pretty quickly, because alternative 5 is essentially alternative 2, where we said, well, if we could build 2 temporary bridges out here and not restore, we'll just get rid of the strong back girder, and we'll just go back to the original concept of alternative 2, which was put temporary structures out here, but rather than try and rehab the existing, we'll just build a new bridge in this corridor. So that's essentially alternative 5 in a nutshell. Put the temporary bridges back, replace the existing bridge with a brand new structure, that does not have to be, would be redundant as opposed to the two girder system of alternative 2. Okay, so in essence, this section lets us remove this structure in its entirety. We build brand new structure in its place. That structure matches the desired section, and we have not had to reuse any of the existing system, and we don't have a two girder system. We end up with a redundant framing system. Okay, so this has all those same advantages, if you will, of alternative 2, in that we can build the structure in one shot, if you will, where we move traffic to temporary bridges, allow the contractor to have that entire area to demo and reconstruct. It's a safe work zone. The problem is, again, we've got 2 temporary bridges and significant environmental impacts on both sides. Alternative 6 is alternative 4, which is overbuild to the south. Well, this eliminates any need for any strong back girder. We said, okay, if we could stage the work by overbuilding on the south, what if we overbuild to the north in combination? That's this option. So we would demo part of it, overbuild to the south, have traffic here and traffic on the existing structure. But in this case, we would not put the strong back girder on. We would just maintain one lane of traffic here, remove the sidewalk on the north side, build enough new bridge on this side, but we'd have to overbuild it so that we could maintain one lane of traffic in the next phase so that we could then demolish the structure. So alternative 6 is basically overbuilding to both sides. And as you can see, we end up with significantly widened sidewalks, as you would expect on both sides, similar to where we wound up with an excessive sidewalk or a large sidewalk on the south side. By eliminating the temporary structures and the strong back girder, we end up with significantly wide, overbuilt, overkilled sidewalks, if you would, that it far exceeds what we would need out here. So, as again, the main advantage, it eliminates any temporary bridges and eliminates the need for a strong back girder as well. Okay. The disadvantage is we've built a bridge that's 18 feet wider than necessary. We've got impacts from an environmental standpoint on both sides. That significant width of structure increases our overall construction cost. This one obviously has the longest construction duration simply because we're building more, and therefore it increases the overall construction duration. We'd be remiss if we didn't look at, could we divert traffic in its entirety, detour everyone around the site, and see if we could get in, rebuild this structure as quickly as possible and get out. Okay. The problem with that is that, as you can see here from this slide, the detour to the north, you end up having to go all the way around the reservoir, 9-mile detour. If we were to try and use a detour to the south, we're putting traffic on a structure that the EMS folks and the fire department have told us, their preference is not to do this simply because under severe storm events, this bridge can flood, and therefore they would be left without an easy access to provide service to the residents on the on the east side of the river. Okay. So while the advantages of detouring the traffic are such that this gives us the shortest construction duration, gives the contractor entire control of that site. Okay, once he's removed the utilities and taken the utilities out of the way from a constraint standpoint, there's nothing stopping him other than dismantling the existing structure, building a new one. So while it offers the shortest duration, the fact that it requires significant detours is a major disadvantage to this alternative. So again, working through, is there any other way we could look at this? We looked at our last alternative. We applied some what's called accelerated bridge construction methodologies. Is there a way we could build an entirely new structure, brand new bridge in essence, on temporary faults work offline of this existing bridge, and then literally slide this new structure over after we close traffic for a duration of a short detour, demo the existing structure, slide this new structure in. Okay. In theory, it sounds great. The disadvantages to this are that you severely limit the amount of contractors that are familiar with this type of work, comfortable with this type of work, understand the risks associated with this type of work. And so by doing that, you limit the competition, your costs go up. Not only that, this also has the greatest impacts to the south side of the property because you're building an entirely new structure there. You got temporary faults work that has to come in. We also would have to do modifications within the roadway system during intermittent detours and possibly, and as well as night work, in order to build a new substructure, new foundation behind the existing bridge. So we'd have to come in and build all of that at night. Temporary plates would be installed so that you could maintain traffic, restore traffic in the morning. And all of this adds, significant risk. So the costs go up. So after all this is said and done, what we do is we use a matrix method to analyze the various alternatives. And we compile the matrix to basically on one sheet show us, okay, so which of these alternatives that we've looked at checks off the most of the boxes that we want. Okay, does it restore, as I mentioned, does it first satisfy the purpose and need? Yes or no? So you can tell all of these that we looked at satisfy that purpose of restoring the structural integrity of the crossing and increasing the width of the bridge. All of them address that. As we then advance across the criteria across the top, we're looking for how would we maintain traffic? Does this maintain traffic? Obviously, the detour alternative does not maintain traffic across Oradell Avenue. Okay. And then we look to other complications or other entities. Permits. Are we looking at different permits? Are we looking, and by this we're looking at, are there greater environmental impacts? Well, obviously the alternatives that used 2 temporary structures, such as, such as alternative 2 or alternative 6, those have greater environmental impacts because we're on both sides of the property, of the park property. Okay. So we utilize this to kind of walk ourselves and guide us, in essence, to which alternative makes the most sense. And utilizing this, and as you can see here, cost is also a factor. We show it at the end because, quite honestly, cost should not necessarily be the overriding factor if we could achieve everything else and have a reasonable cost. As I mentioned, detour, if you look here, if cost was the only thing, everybody would say, great, just detour traffic and let the contractor get in and build this, and that would save us money, okay? But we recognize that does not achieve the goals of maintaining access, in particular, safety, response times, and access for EMS, fire to get across to service those people who live on the east side of the river. And therefore, as we work our way through this matrix, we ended up actually, even though our intent is to seek your input tonight, but I will share, what we felt is the most reasonable course of action. And that was alternative 3. We feel that this provides the best balance, if you will, of it restores the structural integrity, minimizes environmental impacts, in particular, minimizes impacts to the park on the south side, achieves all of this at a reasonable cost and at a reasonable duration of time. Okay. With that said, as we had walked through these alternatives with local officials and stakeholders and hearing from others as we developed these, it came to fruition that the desire for minimizing, once we impacted the park on the south side with either a temporary bridge or overbuild or anything along those lines, any impacts to the environment, we wanted to make sure that we mitigated those impacts. In working with Bergen County Parks Department and Oradell, it's recognized that the park to the south and to the north, but mostly to the south, is being looked at as for park enhancement. Bergen County has a long-range plan to enhance the park property, the linear park that extends along the Hackensack River. And so in association with this preliminary preferred alternative that we've shown here, Bergen County Parks Department also did a conceptual enhancement of, as we were to leave the site, if you would, after where the temporary structure was, we would be able to possibly enhance access and or view shed of the river for everyone that sits there. And the Parks Department actually generated a rendering of a concept that would, fit well with the preliminary preferred alternative and enhance access and or view shed of the park. So that's what's shown here in combination with the preliminary preferred alternative, which is build this structure utilizing a combination of the single temporary structure on the south side in combination with the strong back girder. It allows us to keep the new bridge within the footprint of the existing right-of-way and roadway, and at the same time minimize impacts to the adjacent properties. And as I said, since we would be having impacts to the park on the south side associated with the temporary bypass road, in working with Bergen County and Oradell, it's felt that this enhancements could be added to alternative 3 to provide the overlook and the park enhancement. With that, I realize I've spent a lot of time kind of going through this, and as I mentioned, it's more important that we hear from you and get your input. That's what we're here for tonight, is to seek your support, hear what comments and concerns you may have. Once that's done, if there's consensus that alternative 3 is the way to go forward, then formal resolutions of support would be solicited from both Oradell and Bergen County, and we would complete our report, which documents all the studies into all the various alternatives, all the data that we've gathered. That report is then submitted for approval by DOT, by NJTPA, Bergen County, as well as Federal Highway, so that the concept development phase of the project can be completed, bought into, accepted, and then the project can graduate and get to the next phase of its life. So with that, I'm going to open it back up to give it back to Nicole. We're here to answer any questions. We're here to look for your concerns or thoughts on the alternatives. And as I said, we can go back to any slide if need be.
Great. Thank you so much, Rick. And everyone, at this time, we're going to open the floor for Q&A, and we will remain available, as Rick said, to go over any other slides or anything that you'd like us to go back over. So I did mention that we would start with the chat box first. So we did already receive 2 questions in the chat box, and I invite you to, at this time, type in your questions or even comments. If you have any comments that you agree with something, that you like something, please let us know, because now is your time to ask questions of Rick and our other project team members on the call. So we're going to start with the first question that came up. It says, when and if you replace the bridge, you said that you would mimic the existing bridge. Can you explain what parts would be different?
Yeah. Well, under the alternative 2, and I'll just slide back through these various alternatives to get us back to alternative 2. Under alternative 2, we started with that as the very first alternative, simply because we said, is there any advantage whatsoever to us trying to salvage and reuse any components of this existing bridge? Does it make sense for us to salvage it? Does it make sense at all to save any of the components? So that's why we included this section, because as you can tell from the top side, this is a slice literally through the bridge, the existing structure. It's got two main girders, one either side, that carries the roadway system with a sidewalk outboard that's cantilevered outboard of the main girders. This alternative basically says, could we salvage any of this structure and reuse it in a structure that, as I call, mimics this structure, in that, yes, they look the same, but everything here, exclusive of these two main girders, would be brand new. Simply because by the time in order to extract these two girders, we have to remove the entire concrete deck. We have to remove all the floor beams so that we can, and these cantilevers, so that we can literally take these girders away from the site, send it, to a fabrication shop where these two existing girders would be cleaned, would be repaired, would be strengthened, so that in essence, we would redesign this member to carry the new loads imposed on it. So while these two look very similar, because they're still a two girder system, the only element that would be salvaged from this existing bridge are these two main girders. So, and that's why we're trying to say, but one of the significant disadvantages of this system is that you end up with a non-redundant system again. So when it's all said and done, yes, you have a new bridge structure, superstructure, but you end up with a two girder system again. So as I mentioned, it's more desirable to provide a redundant structure where you would end up with more than two girders carrying the loads. And that's the main drawback. But by mimicking it, that's what I meant, is that this new structure under this scenario would in essence look like the existing.
Okay, thank you, Rick. The next question says, approximately how much longer would option 3 take to complete compared to the option with 2 temporary bridges?
Okay, let me just run back to the matrix. And I realize I kind of went through the matrix very quickly, but on the matrix slide, you'll see in here that one of the things, thank you, one of the things that we identify in here is construction duration. Okay, let's see if I could make this larger, I would. I apologize, but it's this single column right here gives an estimated construction duration. Now, you're asking how much longer would alternative, I believe it was for the two temporary bridges.
Option 3 versus the option with 2 temporaries, yes.
Right, so alternative 3, which utilizes a single temporary bridge, we've estimated the overall construction duration at between 15 and 18 months. Okay, now what that means is that's total construction duration. In other words, from when the contractor is engaged to when he leaves the site. So that's not the amount of time that traffic is staged, if you will, or alternating through the construction zone, because there is work up front where they have to relocate the utilities, and that work is comparable to all of them. But this gives you a general range, 15 to 18 months for alternative 3, alternative 5, where we would build a brand new bridge with 2 temporary bridges. We're still, we save a little bit of time, and then we're saying, okay, we would do this in 12 to 15 months. And the difference being that under alternative 3, as I mentioned, we've added a stage. In other words, we've traded off impacts to the park properties on the north side by reusing a portion of the existing structure to carry traffic on that north side. So we've added a stage, which means that our duration extends on alternative 3 as compared to alternative 5. But the trade-off for that is that the impacts to the environment are significantly less under alternative 3 than they are under alternative 5, simply because we've isolated the impacts, if you would, to only be on the south side with alternative 3.
Okay, great. And I don't see any other questions in the chat box at this time, but I did encourage everyone to please, at this time, enter those comments and questions into the chat box. Or I do believe we still have, I think, or we have 2 callers on the line, so we can certainly unmute them if they would like to ask questions. All right,
No, I'm good.
I'm unmuting both of the callers. Anyone have any questions or comments for the team?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Joe Baladi, my apology. I could not use the computer, so I'm calling in. I would like to thank Nick Benino for great presentation. And I'm here also if I can answer any question. I'm on the call. Thank you.
One of the things I wanted to point out, Nicole, is that, you know, I realize we've covered a lot of information here, and it's a lot to wrap your head around, if you will, if you're not dealing with it on a regular basis. But this presentation will remain available, stays open. It will actually be transferred onto the project's website, so that if you did not hear everything, you want to go back and look at the slides, you can do that at your leisure. And you can also then submit additional questions if you have them. I believe that it stays open for 30 days. Is that correct, Nicole?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So that, you know, if after the end of today you get home and you say, oh, if I had only asked question X, don't hesitate. You can still ask that question. And one of the things I wanted to point out, we're in the concept development phase of this project. So as I mentioned, once we get through this phase, our goal is to walk away with public support for the project, and to have assurance that we've designed a project, or we've laid out a concept that doesn't have any fatal flaws, so that it doesn't graduate to the next phase only to lose public support or to come across an issue that would be a fatal flaw. That's what we're trying to rectify, all of that, and get all of those identified in the concept development phase, so that once the project graduates to its design phases, it can proceed through the design phase to construction without significant ramifications resulting from something that wasn't identified during this phase, or and kind of have all the information intact, if you would, our ducks in a row, so to speak, so that when the project advances, it advances smoothly through the next phases. And part of the public outreach process that we've started in this phase continues through those design phases as well as into construction. So this wouldn't be the last time you're hearing of this project, is what I'm trying to say.
Correct. Thank you, Rick. That's a great explanation of this. And as he said, this video recording will remain on the website for the next 30 days, if not longer. And we'll probably also include a PowerPoint PDF of the PowerPoint slides, so that people can view them, because especially with the alternative analysis matrix, it is very small on the screen.
Yeah.
So we understand you'd like to look at this a little bit further. So all of this information will be up on the website tomorrow, which is OradellAvenueBridge.com. Okay, I have one other question that's come into the chat box. It says, are there any estimates of how long the delays would be in terms of traffic backup between the 2 temporary bridges versus the options with 1 bridge?
We have not run any simulations under those. I suffice it to say, personally, I think they would be comparable. Once you go to staging the work, you're flowing through a construction zone. You are you know, you're going to obviously be at a lower speed. Granted, the speed on this roadway right now is posted for 30 miles an hour, so people are not, this is not a major highway. The intent of utilizing the staging here is to make sure that we maintain that accessibility, direct accessibility to everyone between both sides of the community, if you will, and to make sure that all vehicles, including emergency services vehicles, would have access across this at this location throughout construction. So will there be backups? I think there will be, obviously, to start. You know, as you get a new traffic pattern, there's always delays. People, you know, sense there's new, but what we've tried to do, if I could let me jump back and show you. What we've tried to do is keep the flow of traffic where it wants to be naturally, if you would. Okay, so for example, if we jump to alternative 3 where we have the temporary bridge, I apologize, let me get back to it. Okay, where we have the temporary bridge, our intent is to eastbound and westbound traffic. So keep everyone in eastbound traffic and or westbound traffic where they would ideally like to be. In other words, if you're on the right side headed eastbound, you'd want to stay to the right. It's just natural that we stay to the right. Okay, as you're coming westbound, you know, you'll just be slid over a little bit, but you end up on the appropriate side of traffic so that there's no crossing over of traffic that flows. So once the traffic flow is established, then most people would get comfortable with it, and the flow tends to restore its normal flow. There are certain constraints that are going to obviously control flow here anyway. You've got the at-grade crossing with New Jersey Transit's traffic for people being dropped off at the station and getting picked up. But that's the intent of the staging schemes, is to try and keep traffic in its normal pattern as much as possible. That's why even when we tried to split and put the traffic on the north side, gives the contractor the center zone, as opposed to putting both temporary structures on the south side, for example. But to answer your question, there will be delays. But I think the flow will obviously, because of the speed of the road, they'll kind of alleviate themselves. A lot of people would also, you know, there is New Milford Road to use. Other people will get comfortable with the construction zone. Some people say, I just want to avoid it. And if it takes me a little bit longer to go New Milford, as long as New Milford is not flooded, obviously, they may divert and use New Milford. But the intent is to keep this thoroughfare and this corridor open to traffic as much as practical.
Okay, great. And at this time, we don't have any other questions in the chat box. So again, now is your opportunity to ask your questions or voice your comments to our project team, who are all on the line listening to all of your comments. So please don't be afraid to type into the chat box and provide some feedback. And if anyone on the line would like to speak verbally to the team, you can do that as well. Just type into the chat box and say, I'd like to speak, and I will certainly let you go off mute, and then we can go from there. So at this time, we'll just continue to hold until there's more questions. And once again, all of this project information and this recording will be available on the project website tomorrow. We've gone through the entire presentation and we've gone through our questions and answers. So it is at this point the end of the formal presentation, but again, this is our Q&A portion and we will be here until 8 p.m. So now is your chance to ask any questions or voice your concerns or comments rather. And again, this process is not the end. If you think of anything, this process is still open to you for the next 30 days or more. So you can always contact the project team through the website.
Nicole, if we don't have any questions, maybe I should spend, if it's okay with everybody, I'll just spend a couple of minutes. I know I did just kind of jump from the final alternative, if you will, preliminary preferred alternative to the concept of the rendering that was done by the Parks Department. And in that, this gives, I think, people a sense for what the vision would be at the conclusion of the project. There are slight, we did make slight changes to alternative 3 cross section to this preliminary preferred cross section after working with Bergen County Parks Department, because it was recognized that it would be desirable under this concept plan to have the external railing on the bridge be more, what I'll say is pedestrian friendly, or a more ornamental rail than a vehicular rail. So as this plan shows, what we did to address that was we brought the vehicular rail, as we'll call it, the traffic railing, to the curb line in this final plan for the preliminary preferred alternative, so that vehicles that using Oradell Avenue are separated from pedestrians with a railing that is vehicular crash worthy, so that they're safely protected from vehicular traffic. And that allows the outside railing to be a more ornamental, it opens up more options, if you will, for this outside railing, pedestrian friendly. This also kind of blends, this section was then applied to the county's preferred, or not preferred, but the county's concept of how this cross section of bridge would transition, if you would, to the approaches on either end of the structure. And you can see here that the concept, again, has the vehicular rail along the curb line. And what they have shown here is that the pedestrian railing on the outside of the structure, if you're looking down on the structure, once it got off the structure, would extend around the outside of the, as we're calling them, the overlook areas, or the, potential areas to sit or view the park to the south, those types of things. And you can see how this would transition if you take this section. If you're walking along the sidewalk, if you're approaching the structure headed towards the train station, you could, as you get towards the structure, you could stop here and look towards the park, or you could simply continue along the bridge sidewalk here. And as you came off the structure, if you wanted to stop, or if you were already on this side, you could stop here as well. Whereas, so as you get across the bridge proper and you come onto the approach, you would just simply transition out to these overlook areas. So that's why it was desirable to have the railing on the outside be pedestrian friendly, more ornamental, if you would. It still has to satisfy design criteria, but it does not have to be vehicularly, capable of taking a vehicular load, whereas the railings, the bridge railings along the curb line would in this case. And so the county has shown here a lower rail that we initially showed on alternative 3, and that we had mimicked a lower rail on this cross section here of the preliminary preferred alternative. So this plan and section basically represents alternative 3 with a little bit of softness, if you would, or a little bit of modifications to it that were introduced to blend and coordinate with the Parks Department's rendering. I just figured since we had some free time, I would just cover that in case people were wondering.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Rick. And again, at this time, if anyone has any comments or questions for Rick, now is your opportunity to do so. Well, as we've said before, this is the conclusion of our presentation. However, it is not the conclusion of the meeting. So we will remain on the line until 8 p.m. to answer any comments or questions or go over any other areas of the presentation that you would like to see. Rick, a question came in about the projected date for the next phase. When do we think that PE would start?
Well, here's the process. Our time frame to complete the study, the CD phase, the concept development phase, is our goal is to be done with our report and have the report approved and reviewed by everybody, including Federal Highway. Our goal is to have our report done by June of this year. What happens next after that is once the project status is approved and quote unquote graduates, it then becomes Bergen County would then prepare a request for proposals to advance the next design phase. So then that could take anywhere from 6 months, depends on funding. If Joe's still on, he could probably give a good handle on this, or if someone is on from NJTPA, it could take 6 months to a year, let's say, until that funding and selection of a firm to advance the design phase could be instituted. Then you would go into preliminary engineering, which would entail obtaining the environmental documents that's necessary for the project. And then at that point, once the environmental document process is entailed, you could then advance to final design, where you get into what I'll say is the hardcore design for the project. But overall, typically between the start of CD and actual construction starting can be order of magnitude 5 to 6 years in that overall, from when we first started until when the project starts shoveling the ground. Could take 6 years because of the funding, because of trying to you've got to secure a design firm, get your permits in hand, and those types of things. So that's the overall lifetime between concept development and start of construction.
Great, thanks, Rick. I have another question for you. Is the height of the new bridge going to be above the flood height? Last few storms, water overtook the bridge.
Well, that's always a good question. The long and the short answer are kind of one and the same. In order to obtain permits for projects that cross waterways, the requirements of the NJDEP are such that the project is not allowed to pass more water downstream than exists today. In other words, the conditions that exist today from stream flow must exist pre-construction and the same results post-construction. And so in order to do that, you have to ensure that you aren't having dramatic changes in the hydraulic opening of the bridge, and you're not raising the profiles to a point where you're cutting off more flow if in fact the higher storms, which is what is being brought up, if under a extensive storm or a higher storm event, the bridge overtops, then in essence we could not raise the structure to get it entirely out of those storm events by opening up the waterway and passing that water downstream. If I'm making myself clear, in other words, by us raising this profile such that we would pass more water through this crossing in the higher storms, all we would be doing was passing that water downstream. And so if somebody downstream today is not inundated under that storm, the intent of the permit requirements is such that after this bridge is worked on, we would not impose any undue hardship on that property afterwards. In other words, if they're not flooded today and we replace this bridge and simply say we want to raise the structure so we get it out of these extreme events, and we are imposing, by passing more water downstream, imposing an impact to another property owner, that's what the permit is required to eliminate, if you would. So the answer to the question is most likely the storms that are passed today would still be passed tomorrow. And in the extreme events, the roadway would probably overtop a little bit. But our understanding in talking to the local officials is that while the structure to the south I guess floods more frequently, I guess would be the best way to put it. For lower storms, the structure to the south is inundated even more. And that the Oradell Avenue Bridge does remain open or passable for their equipment under even the most severe storms. So I guess that I don't know if that answers the question, but we're not going to raise the profile dramatically. The other constraint besides the permitting issues is the fact that we have the railroad crossing immediately to the west, significantly raising. Again, we will probably raise this structure slightly, the roadway profile slightly, but it will not be dramatic because the existing bridge is slightly lower than the railroad today, the railroad crossing. And so we can raise it slightly as long as we can satisfy the permit criteria without impacting the railroad's profile. So our goal is to kind of seek that balance, if you would, where we get a little bit better storm protection, still satisfy the permit requirements, and not impose any impact, not only to downstream or upstream property owners, but also avoid impacts to New Jersey Transit's tracks.
Great, thank you. All right, once again, comments and questions are all yours. You have the next 45 minutes to ask any questions that you would like of our project team on the line today. One more question came in. During construction, will the road maintain traffic or will there be a full closure and detour?
No, the intent is to not close the road. We looked at an alternative. Alternative 7 was fully close the road to through traffic. But we realized that, given the detour lengths, as I mentioned, to detour everybody around the project site, we've got a 9-mile detour to the north and almost 3 miles to the south. And as I mentioned, one of the criteria that we heard loud and clear was to, if at all costs, try and maintain traffic on this corridor while the bridge condition of the bridge is rectified. So the intent is that traffic will be allowed to continue along Oradell at this location, cross this location, either, as we mentioned, through this case, we're using a temporary bridge in combination with the strong back girder solution to allow us to do that.
Okay, thank you. And we don't have any other comments or questions right now in the chat box. So once again, we'll just continue to remain on the line unless anyone else thinks of anything. But again, the formal presentation is complete. We've gone through all of our meeting materials. So now again is your opportunity to give us some feedback or provide some questions or comments that you might have. I have another one, Rick.
Good.
I know, as soon as I'm done saying it,
Yeah,
there's another
that's
one that
fine.
pops in.
That's fine.
So that's great. We want
Yeah.
them. We want you to
Yes,
continue to
exactly.
asking, you know, that's what this is
That's-
all about. It's your turn to talk. So, all right, I've got another one. It says here, not considering the expedited option, will any of the options 3 through 6 involve working in the evenings?
Well, no, the goal of the work is to not have to do anything at night. And the only one that I saw that had any potential for night work would have been the expedited option, alternative 8, simply because you have to do work in the road. So ideally, there should be no night work on it. It doesn't, you know, I'm just thinking there may be some deliveries where there may be a temporary slowdown of traffic in one direction to allow the contractor to deliver some materials, that type of thing. But no, the intent would be that he gets his work done during the day.
Thank you so much, Rick. I'm seeing that we do still have quite a few number of people on who are members of the public and not elected officials or any of our project team members. So again, if you're participating in this meeting and have any questions or comments that you'd like to offer tonight, now is your chance. But if not, again, the meeting materials will all be available tomorrow on OradellAvenueBridge.com, including this recording. And you will have the opportunity to provide additional comments or questions as we continue the public engagement process. So we'll just hang on until the next one comes in. Rick, maybe since there aren't going to potentially be too many more questions, maybe you can put the last slide up with the contact information if they have any questions. There was a question actually just asked about the lighting. Will lighting be proposed with the new bridge?
And I guess what I'm wondering is the question, will the bridge be lit or will the roadway lighting that exists today be supplemented, I guess?
Street lights, it says.
Yeah. Well, as part of the job, if in fact there is a concern right now with, you know, additional lighting being necessary, I think that could just be brought to the attention of both Oradell and or the county. And that could certainly be addressed as part of the design, in the design phase, to look at that. You know, our primary focus was to look at the bridge itself, if you would, and how would we replace the bridge, and focus on that from a staging standpoint, et cetera. But if there is a concern with, you know, adding additional lighting, whether it's roadway lighting or just lighting in general, given the fact that it's close to the train station and such, I think that would just be brought to the municipality and or the county to, which could be incorporated or addressed, I would think, in final design or in the design phase.
Absolutely. And I want to also point out that we want to thank Nick at OPTV, who has offered to air this for us. And he's saying that they will re-air this presentation at 12 noon on Saturday and Sunday this weekend. So thank you to OPTV, and thank you to everyone for participating tonight in the meeting. Again, this video will be available likely tomorrow on OradellAvenueBridge.com. So on behalf of the project team, I want to thank everybody for their time. And again, we will remain on the line for additional questions or comments, etc. So thank you so much.
I would like to, again, if there are no immediate questions, that, this was done as a team, as Nicole was saying. Nicole is with Stokes Creative Group. They were brought on as part of the Dewberry team to assist us with this public outreach and guide us through the process of public outreach to make sure that we are engaging the public and reaching out to as many people as we can. In addition to that, we do have other sub-consultants on board that assisted with surveying the site for us to get a space mapping. That was Malik and Shira. We used TechniQuest, another firm, to gather data from traffic for us. And it's been we've interacted, as I mentioned, throughout the process with NJTPA as the lead agency in association with Bergen County, obviously, and Oradell as well. Their voice has been a large component, and we appreciate all the participation on that. Obviously, Oradell and the community surrounding the bridge live there, use the structure every day. And that's what our role is, to make sure that that the solution that we come up with is, number one, viable, but number two, has community support. And not number one and number two, but that the solution does achieve that community support, so that, as I mentioned, as it progresses forward, the project continues to engage the community and lets the community know what's happening with the project, where it stands, as it progresses through its design phases to construction.
All right, at this point, we will go on mute and remain muted unless anyone else has questions. And we will be here again till 8 p.m. So thank you. The time is now 8 p.m. This concludes our second online Public Information Center meeting for the Oradell Avenue Bridge LCD study. On behalf of the project team, we'd like to thank you for your time and participation this evening. Please be sure to visit OradellAvenueBridge.com to stay connected with the study. And that will conclude our meeting. Thank you very much and have a great evening.
This conference will now be recorded.